The morning rush at Grandview Hotel was its usual storm of clinking glasses, hurried footsteps, and impatient voices, but Zara Chen had learned how to survive it. At just 23, she had mastered the art of moving, unseen, slipping between tables with trays balanced perfectly, offering polite smiles to guests who barely lifted their eyes from glowing screens. Her dark hair was pulled into a simple ponytail, her uniform crisp though second-hand. She didn't have the wealth of those she served, but she carried herself with a quiet dignity. It was the very thing her manager, Mr. Harrison, disapproved if. He wanted his staff eager, submissive, almost invisible. Zara, however, carried herself like she belonged anywhere, even if her world said otherwise. That Tuesday morning seemed like every other, until she saw him, a tall figure by the entrance, broad shoulders, a perfectly tailored dark suit that looked carved to his frame. For a split second, Zara's heart raced. She knew that silhouette. Rosa, her best friend, had been telling her non-stop about the new man in her life, a businessman she'd met at a conference. Handsome, successful, utterly charming. Zara had seen the photos, memorized them even, through Rosa's excited retellings, and now he was here, without a second thought. She abandoned her tray on a nearby table and rushed forward, her excitement outpacing reason. "Rosa told me so much about you." Zara beamed as she threw her arms around him. "But she didn't mention how tall you were." The man froze. His body was solid, far stronger than she expected. He smelled not of cheap cologne, but something deep, expensive, intoxicating. Guests nearby paused, their eyes flicking curiously toward the scene. Slowly, so slowly, he pulled back just enough to look down at her, and Zara's breath caught. Those weren't the warm brown eyes from Rosa's photos. No, this stranger's gaze was still grey, sharp, piercing, commanding. The kind of eyes that didn't belong to a casual businessman, but to someone used to power. Someone dangerous, or important, or both. In that instant, Zara realized her mistake. This wasn't Rosa's new boyfriend. This was someone else entirely, and she had just thrown herself into his arms. They were the color of storm clouds, intense, penetrating, framed by lashes so dark and thick most women would envy them. His face was sharp, striking, the kind that belonged on a magazine cover. Not in Zara's everyday world, and this was definitely not Rosa's boyfriend. "Oh my God." Zara gasped, stumbling back so fast she nearly tripped over her own feet. Heat surged up her neck, her face burning as the weight of what she had just done crashed over her like ice water. "I am so sorry. I thought you were someone else." One eyebrow arched, slow and deliberate. And to Zara's surprise, there was no anger in his expression. If anything, he looked faintly amused. Someone else. His voice was low, smooth, and unnervingly steady. My friend's boyfriend," she stammered, wishing the floor would open and swallow her whole. "You have the same build, and I only saw you from behind, so I just assumed." She pressed a hand to her forehead. "God, this is humiliating. I don't go around hugging random strangers, I swear." Instead of brushing her off, the stranger studied her face with a quiet intensity, as though she were a puzzle he was determined to solve. "Your friend's boyfriend," he repeated slowly. "And you were that excited to meet him?" Zara swallowed, still mortified, but inexplicably unable to stop explaining herself. "Rose has been really happy lately. She's usually unlucky with guys, but then she met this amazing businessman who treats her like a princess. I guess I got carried away." Something flickered in his eyes, so quick she couldn't place it. "And what did you think of me?" he asked, his tone softer now, before you realized I wasn't him. The question blindsided her. Zara blinked. I mean, well, you seemed successful, nice. Rose said her boyfriend was charming, that underneath the business suits he had a good heart. A subtle shift crossed his expressions, something she couldn't quite name, but before she could ask, her manager's sharp bark cut through the air. Miss Chen, what are you doing? Mr. Harrison stormed across the floor, his balding head shining under the lights, his face blotched red with fury. He had a habit of making up for his lack of presence with unnecessary cruelty, and tonight was no exception. I sincerely apologize, sir, he said to the stranger, pointedly ignoring Zara. His voice oozed false deference. This employee was completely out of line. It will not happen again. The stranger's calm reply caught them both off guard. Actually, it was just a misunderstanding. No harm done. But Harrison was already in full damage control mode, desperate to smooth things over. Miss Chen, back to the kitchen. Immediately, we'll discuss this later. The unspoken threat in his tone landed like a weight in Zara's stomach. She felt it sink, heavy and cold. Zara needed this job more than air. With her parents gone in a tragic car accident 3 years ago, she'd become both sister and guardian. To Juno, who was still in college, every dollar Zara earned went toward rent, tuition, and the fragile hope of keeping their lives together. Please, she whispered to her manager, her voice trembling but steady enough to carry. It was an honest mistake. I thought I recognized him. Before Harrison could unleash another cutting remark, the stranger stepped forward. His voice was calm but carried a weight that instantly shifted the balance in the room. If I may, he said smoothly, your employee was simply being friendly. And if you ask me, genuine warmth is rare in places like this. I'd rather have someone accidentally kind than deliberately cold. Harrison's eyes flickered with surprise, his tone softening in a way Zara had never heard before. Only then did she realize this man wasn't just wealthy. He was important. Important enough to make her arrogant manager nervous. Of course, sir, you're absolutely right. Harrison turned stiffly to her. Miss Chen, return to your duties. Zara nodded quickly, relief flooding her as she escaped back to her station. But she could still feel his gaze lingering on her, steady and unreadable. Her hands shook as she reached for her abandoned tray, her heart still racing from the encounter. A daily mystery the next morning, when Zara arrived at the cafe, she nearly dropped her order pad. The stranger was back. He sat at the same corner table, immaculate in another tailored suit, and waited with the kind of patient stillness that made him impossible to ignore. When she approached, forcing professionalism into her tone, her pulse betrayed her. Good morning. What can I get for you today? Coffee, he said simply, black. Then, after a pause, his lips curved into something between a smile and a challenge, and maybe an explanation. Zara blinked, frowning. An explanation. His smile widened, transforming his sharp, untouchable face into something startlingly human. Yesterday, you mistook me for someone else. Today, you're treating me like I might bite. Which version of you is real? The question was so unexpected, so unguarded, that Zara's usual defenses faltered. Both, she admitted softly. Yesterday, I thought you were someone I'd heard wonderful things about. Today, I know you're a stranger who probably thinks I'm insane. I don't think you're insane, he said quietly, his storm grey eyes fixed on hers. I think you're interesting. Growing curiosity over the following week, The stranger became a constant presence in her world, always at the same table, always ordering the same black coffee, always asking questions that felt more like conversations than idle chatter. But he never gave her his name, and Zara, stubbornly proud, never asked. What unsettled her most wasn't his persistence, it was his genuine curiosity. Unlike the polished, small talk she'd mastered with other wealthy customers, his questions felt real. He asked about her paintings, her dreams, her thoughts on books, storms, even the smell of rain. He listened, really listened, as if her words mattered, and for the first time in a long time, Zara found herself wanting to answer. In return, Damon shared fragments of his own life, though never too much at once. His love of old black and white films, the complicated, brittle ties that bound him to his family, his belief that most people moved through the world performing roles, instead of truly living them. Zara found herself anticipating these conversations far more than she cared to admit. There was something magnetic about him. Maybe it was the way he listened, as though her words carried weight. Maybe it was the way his gaze seemed to pierce past the apron and coffee stains, seeing her not just the server, but the woman underneath. The question that changed everything, it happened on Friday. Zara was refilling his cup, steam curling between them, when his voice dropped to something softer, almost vulnerable. "Zara," he said, "why do you work so hard to be invisible?" Her hand jerked. The pot nearly slipped from her grasp. "What do you mean?" "You move through this place like you're trying not to be noticed," he said simply, his storm grey eyes steady. On hers, "You're beautiful, you're smart, you're kind, but you act like you're apologizing for taking up space." The words pierced her like no insult ever had, because they were true. No one had ever seen her so clearly, and it terrified her. "Maybe some of us can't afford to take up too much space," she murmured defensively. He was silent for a long moment. Then, with a calm deliberation, he reached into his jacket pocket and placed a single black card on the table. "My name," he said quietly, "is Damon Blackwood, and I think you deserve to take up all the space you want." The weight of Truth Zara's gaze dropped to the card, her pulse thundering in her ears. Blackwood Industries. The name was everywhere, glowing billboards that lit the city's skyline. In glossy financial magazines, hotel guests abandoned. In newscasts about bold acquisitions and billion-dollar deals. Her heart nearly stopped. Damon Blackwood wasn't just wealthy. He wasn't just important. He was that Damon Blackwood, one of the youngest billionaires in America. A man whose empire stretched from Silicon Valley to New York, shaping entire industries before his 30th birthday. And yet, for a week, he had sat across from her in a cafe, drinking black coffee, asking about her art, her dreams, her fears, as if she were his equal. When she finally lifted her gaze back to his, those storm cloud eyes were waiting, unreadable yet unwavering. And in that moment, Zara understood two things with startling clarity. Her simple life had just become dangerously complicated, and despite every rational instinct telling her to run, she wanted to stay, to see what happened next. The accidental hug that had started it all suddenly felt like fate. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. That evening, as Zara walked back to the tiny apartment she shared with her younger sister, Juno, Damon's storm-grey eyes lingered in her mind. When he'd revealed his identity, there had been a flicker of something unexpected in them, something almost vulnerable, as if he'd been bracing himself for her to treat him differently. "You're glowing," Juno teased. The moment Zara stepped into their small living room, the 19-year-old was curled up on their battered second-hand couch, textbooks spread around. her like fallen leaves. Even deep in pre-med studies, Juno always noticed her sister's moods. "I'm tired," Zara said quickly, hanging up her coat. Juno arched a brow. "Tired people don't walk in smiling at nothing." Zara's lips twitched before she could stop them. "Who is he?" Juno pressed, a playful grin lighting her face. Zara froze. How could she possibly explain that she'd accidentally befriended a billionaire? That the man she'd mistaken for her friend's boyfriend now came to her cafe every morning, just to talk to her? Juno would either think she was lying or worse, panicked that her big sister was about to get crushed in someone else's powerful world. "Just a customer at work," Zara said at last. It wasn't a lie. Not completely. Juno studied her suspiciously, but before she could pry further, Zara changed the subject. "How are you feeling today?" The grin faltered. "I'm fine, just a little tired. Exams are brutal." Zara searched her sister's face. Juno had been saying that a lot lately, that she was fine, just tired. But something about the paleness in her cheeks gnawed at Zara's gut. "Maybe you should see a doctor," Zara suggested gently. "Doctors cost money we don't have." Juno replied with a shrug that was too heavy for her small shoulders. "Besides, I'm fine. Stop worrying so much." But Zara couldn't stop. Worry was her job. Ever since the accident had taken their parents 3 years ago, Zara had carried every responsibility: rent, bills, Juno's education, and she would never let her sister see how heavy that weight truly was. An unexpected proposal the next morning. Damon Blackwood was back at his usual table. Zara's heart betrayed her with a faster rhythm as she approached with his order. She told herself she would act normal, whatever normal meant when you were serving coffee to a billionaire who had seen right through you the day before. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her tone deliberately formal. He glanced up from his phone, and the corner of his mouth curved with amusement. "Back to Mr. Blackwood, are we?" "I think it's more appropriate," Zara replied coolly, setting down his cup with military precision. "Appropriate considering you could probably buy this entire hotel with the change in your pocket," she said before she could stop herself. Damon leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing slightly, not with offense but with interest. "You think money defines how people should be treated?" Zara flushed, realizing how it sounded. "I think," she said carefully, "that people like me don't usually have coffee with people like you. And when we do, it usually comes with strings attached." His smile deep and slow, knowing the kind of smile that made her pulse stumble. "What if I told you, Zara Chen, that I don't want to own you, fix you, or buy you? What if I only want honesty, the same honesty that made you mistake me for someone else that first day?" Her breath caught. Honesty was the one thing she had left to give, and the one thing most people never really wanted. "You look nervous," Damon observed from the kitchen doorway. Zara spun, nearly dropping the whisk in her hand. He stood there in a charcoal grey suit, tailored to perfection, but it wasn't the suit that made her breath catch, it was him Damon Blackwood carried power as easily as other men carried wallets, but in that moment his expression wasn't one of a ruthless billionaire. It was soft, curious, gentle. "Well, maybe that's because I am nervous," Zara admitted, smoothing her apron like it could calm her racing heart. "I'm about to serve dinner to people who probably have chefs on speed dial, and she let out a shaky laugh, "I make soup and sandwiches." Damon stepped further into the room, the warm scent of his cologne threading into the air between them. "And yet," he said slowly, I trust you more than any of those chefs do. You know why? She shook her head, too aware of how close he was now. Because they cook for contracts, he murmured, for recognition, for money. His gaze softened as it held hers. You cook for meaning, for care, and that's rarer than any Michelin. Star. Zara's throat tightened. No one had ever spoken about her like that, though her quiet, unglamorous efforts mattered, as though she mattered through the massive windows. The city glittered like a jeweled carpet laid at his feet, a world she had no business stepping into. And yet, here she was, apron tied, hands trembling, standing in the penthouse kitchen of a man who could buy her whole life 10 times over, and still somehow made her feel seen. She looked down at the herb-crusted salmon waiting for the oven, the handmade pasta she'd rolled with aching arms, the chocolate tart cooling on the counterpieces of herself she'd poured into this meal. Hope you're right, she whispered. Damon smiled, the kind that disarmed her completely. Zara Chen, I've never been more certain of anything. Zara's hands stilled on the serving tray as Victoria's voice drifted into the kitchen. Sharp and honeyed at once, rustic, quaint, words meant to sting while dressed as compliments. For a split second, Zara's chest tightened with the old, familiar, panicked kind that came from being reminded she didn't belong in this glittering world. She wasn't trained at some elite culinary institute. She wasn't born into money or privilege. She was just a cafe waitress cooking in a billionaire's kitchen. But before the shame could root itself too deeply, Damon's voice cut through. The din of polished laughter, calm but carrying an edge that made the room fall quiet. Zara isn't a caterer, he said, his tone deliberate. She's an artist who puts care into everything she makes. And I invited her because her food is real, something money can't buy. For the first time all evening, Victoria's perfect smile faltered. Real, she echoed, her gaze flicking toward the service window as if trying to glimpse the womanhood somehow won Damon's attention. Zara forced herself to keep moving, arranging the roasted vegetables with steady hands even as her heart pounded. She had 2 choices: shrink into the background the way she always had, or let her food speak louder than Victoria's cutting remarks. When she carried out the dessert, a shimmering chocolate tart dusted with gold powder, just like her grandmother had once taught her, there was a hush round the table. The rich scent of cocoa and espresso seemed to soften even the hardest expressions. Victoria tilted her head, clearly waiting for someone to scoff, but the first guest took a bite and let out a low sound of surprise. Good God, Damon, this is extraordinary. Compliments followed, genuine and unforced, and Zara felt the heat in her cheeks shift from embarrassment to pride. Damon caught her eye across the room, giving the smallest nod of reassurance, as though to say, "See, you belong here." Victoria lifted her fork with slow precision, finally tasting the dessert. Her smile returned, sharp as glass. Impressive, she conceded, her eyes never leaving Zara's. Perhaps a little too impressive for someone so local. Zara held her gaze, and for the first time in years, didn't look away. Zara shook her head, clutching the strap of her bag like it was the only thing holding her together. You stood up for me, and I'll never forget that. But the truth is, Damon, I don't have the right clothes, the right training, the right background. You saw how they looked at me, how she looked at me. His jaw tightened. Victoria doesn't get to decide your worth. Neither do any of them. Her laugh was brittle, edged with hurt. Easy for you to say. You belong everywhere. I barely belong in my own apartment some days. Damon stepped closer, lowering his voice until it was just for her. You belong with me. Do you understand that? Not because of how you look or what you own, but because of who you are. Do you think I'd invite just anyone into my home, into my life? Her breath caught. Because he was so close now, she could see the storm in his eyes, the same storm she'd felt building in herself since the first day. She'd mistaken him for someone else. You're not my charity, Zara, he said fiercely. You're my choice. For a moment, the world seemed to still around them, the glittering skyline beyond the glass, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the faint lingering scent of roasted herbs and chocolate. Zara's defenses wavered, trembling under the weight. Of his words, she wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But believing meant risking everything. I don't know if I can survive in your world, she whispered. Damon's gaze softened, the storm giving way to something raw and unguarded. Then don't. Let me survive in yours. The honesty of it, the vulnerability in a man who had everything yet was willing to step into her small, imperfect world, shattered the last of her resistance. For the first time since her parents' accident, Zara felt something stronger than fear. She felt seen, and it terrified her even more than Victoria ever could. Zara sank onto the floor, the notice trembling in her hands. No, she whispered, as if sheer denial could erase the words on the page. Foreclosure, auction, debt transferred. Juno glanced up from the box she was sorting. Zara, what is it? Zara swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. It's the restaurant. Mum and Dad's place. It wasn't just closed, it was taken. Juno's face went pale. But that was years ago. Why would she stopped, eyes scanning the document, then widened in shock? Oh my God, look. At the bottom of the page, stamped in stark black ink, was a name Zara had come to know all too well. Blackwood Holdings. Her stomach dropped as if the floor had vanished beneath her. Damon, his company, had bought the building. Their parents' dream hadn't just been lost, it had been swallowed by the empire of the man Zara was falling for. Her chest constricted, panic and betrayal tangling in a knot that made it hard to breathe. Every warm conversation, every lingering look, every promise he'd made, was it all just another power play? Another way for Blackwood to own a piece of her life? Juno touched her hand gently. Zara, maybe he didn't know. He runs a huge company. It could have been a business decision made by someone else. But Zara's heart wouldn't let her accept that. She could still hear Damon's voice in her head. I wanted to see you shine. I wanted to spend time with you. And now, another voice crept in. Or maybe he just wanted to ease his guilt. Her phone buzzed with a message. Damon's name lit up the screen. Dinner tomorrow. I miss you. Zara stared at it through a blur of tears. The foreclosure notice still clutched in her fist. For the first time, she didn't know if she wanted to see him or if she could ever trust him again. Damon rose slowly from behind his desk, the paper still lying between them like a weapon. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, those storm-colored eyes that had once made her feel seen, were heavy with something she couldn't quite name. I didn't know, he repeated, voice low, steady. Not then, not when we met. I swear it. Zara let out a sharp, humorless laugh. You expect me to believe that? Damon Blackwood doesn't not know what his company owns. His jaw tightened. You're right, I should have known. But Blackwood Industries is massive. Hundreds of subsidiaries, thousands of properties. I don't personally sign off on every foreclosure. I didn't connect the Chen family restaurant to you. Not until now. Her throat constricted, anger and grief tangling together. Well, I connected it. That restaurant was everything to my parents. They fought to keep it alive. And when they lost it, when you took it broke them. Do you understand? That night, they died. They were out looking for another location. Because of this. She stabbed a trembling finger at the notice. For the first time since she'd met him, Damon looked shaken. He reached out, but stopped himself halfway, fingers curling into a fist. Zara, I never wanted this. Not for you. Not for your family. If I had known, but you didn't. She cut him off, voice trembling. You didn't know, and you didn't care. To you, it was just numbers on a spreadsheet. To me, it was my life. My parents' lives. Silence hung between them, broken only by the faint hum of the city beyond the glass walls. Damon finally spoke, his voice rough. You're right. I can't undo what happened. I can't bring them back or erase the pain my company caused. But believe me when I say this, Zara, I would give anything to change that. His grey eyes met hers, unflinching now, raw. The question is, can you believe that the man standing in front of you is not the company that hurt? You, Zara's chest ached. She wanted to scream at him, wanted to run, but a part of her, traitorous and aching, still wanted to believe him. Zara's voice shook, but her words cut like glass. What do we have, Damon? A handful of coffees, a dinner I never should have cooked, a fantasy where I pretend you're not the man whose company ruined my parents' lives. Damon flinched, but didn't back away. His storm grey eyes locked on hers, raw and desperate. We have something real, Zara. Don't tell me you didn't feel it. Every conversation, every look, none of that was a lie. She laughed bitterly, clutching the foreclosure notice like a shield. Of course it wasn't a lie. It was worse. It was a mistake. Mine. For believing that a man like you could see me as anything more than... Her voice cracked, than charity. Don't, Damon said hoarsely. He stepped closer, his control slipping for the first time since she'd met him. Don't reduce this to charity. Don't reduce us to that. I never pitied you. From the first moment you crashed into militarily, saw someone who wasn't afraid to be real with me. Do you have any idea how rare that is in my world? Her eyes stung, but she refused to let the tears fall. Do you have any idea how little that matters when my parents are dead? The silence that followed was suffocating. Damon's hand twitched, like he wanted to reach for her, but knew he no longer had the right. Finally, Zara whispered, her voice hollow, whatever this was. It ends here. And before Damon could stop her, she turned and walked out, leaving the foreclosure notice on his desk like a verdict. Zara's throat tightened. Expensive. How expensive? Dr. Roberts hesitated, as though he hated to say the words out loud. The first stage of dialysis, medication, and monitoring will cost around $40,000. If we move toward transplant, the numbers rise significantly. But please understand, without immediate care, your sister's condition will deteriorate quickly. The room spun. Zara gripped the arm of the chair to steady herself. 40,000. She couldn't even afford a fraction of that. Rent was already a struggle. She thought of the nearly empty fridge at home, the stack of unpaid bills, the second-hand textbooks Juno could barely afford for school. We'll do everything we can to connect you with financial aid, the doctor added kindly, but that process takes time, and time isn't a luxury your sister has. When he left, the silence was crushing. Zara sat at Juno's bedside, watching her chest rise and fall beneath the thin hospital blanket. She reached for her sister's hand, holding it tightly, as if sheer willpower could keep her tethered to life. "Don't you dare leave me, Juno," she whispered fiercely. "I'll find the money. I don't know how yet, but I will. You're all I have." But deep down, she already knew what that meant. There was only one man who could save her sister, the same man she had sworn never to see again, the same man whose empire had destroyed her parents' dream, the same man she was terrified she was. Already in love with, Zara closed her eyes, torn between pride and desperation, knowing she was standing on the edge of a choice that could change everything. Zara's hands trembled as she held the deed. For years, the restaurant had been a symbol of everything she'd lost her parents' dream, their pride, their identity. Seeing her name on it now felt surreal, like the universe had rewound time and handed her a second chance. But it wasn't the paper that undid her. It was the note. No strings attached, no expectations, just love. Love. Damon had said it twice now. Once in a hospital hallway when her world was falling apart. Now again, written in his steady hand, offering her something she'd thought was gone forever. She pressed the note to her chest, tears spilling freely for the first time since Juno's collapse, because she realized she had a choice. She could cling to her pride, keep punishing Damon for sins that weren't truly his, keep telling herself they were too different, that she didn't belong in his world, or she could accept what he was offering not. The money, not the property, not the grand gestures, but his heart. A heart that, for all its wealth and power, wanted nothing more than to beat alongside hers. When she visited Juno that evening, her sister was sitting up in bed, pale but smiling. "You're crying," Juno teased softly. "What happened?" Zara sat beside her, clutching her hand. I think I've been wrong. About love. About what it means to be equal. About Damon." Juno's smile widened knowingly. "So, you're finally going to let yourself be happy?" Zara let out a shaky laugh. "I think I might." And for the first time in years, she believed it. Zara placed the deed on Damon's desk, her hands steady for the first time in weeks. "I don't want this as a gift," she said softly. "I want it as a wedding present." For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy in the room. Damon rose slowly from his chair, his storm-grey eyes wide, his usually confident voice barely a whisper. "Are you proposing to me?" Zara laughed, a laugh that felt freer and lighter than anything she'd known in years. "I'm saying I love you, Damon Blackwood. I love your ridiculous generosity and your complicated heart. I love that you defended me when no one else would, that you dropped everything to help Juno, that you gave me back something I didn't even realize I'd lost. If you're willing to bridge the gap between our worlds, then so am I." The tension broke, replaced by something fierce and bright. Damon crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. "Yes," he murmured against her hair. 1,000 times, yes. 6 months later, the Chen family restaurant buzzed with life once again. Its tables filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the aroma of food made with love. Zara moved through the kitchen with confidence, directing her team with the ease of someone who had finally found her place. Juno, glowing with health, balanced pre-med classes with serving shifts. Her smile, as much a part of the restaurant as the food itself. And at table 12, the one he had claimed from the very beginning, sat Damon. No longer the distant billionaire in tailored suits, but her partner, her biggest supporter, the man who still came every evening just to watch her shine. As Zara set down his plate, the engagement ring on her finger caught the light. It wasn't the largest diamond in the world, but it was perfect, because it was theirs. She paused, meeting Damon's gaze. Storm grey eyes softened with pride and love, and in that moment, Zara understood. Love wasn't about finding someone from your same world. It was about building a new one together. What had started with the wrong hug had led her to exactly the right love.